Brett Favre was the greatest gunslinger the NFL has ever seen. At the time of his retirement, Favre was the NFL leader in passing yards, passing touchdowns, and quarterback wins. Other quarterbacks threw with caution. Favre threw with fire. But that wild style came with a price. Okay, sure, he won 3 straight MVPs, a Super Bowl, and he started 297 games in a row, fighting through injuries that most guys wouldn't even stand up from. But he also threw more interceptions than any quarterback in NFL history, 336 of them. And off the field, well, let's just say his legacy hasn't exactly aged like fine wine. So how good was Brett Favre actually? Well, Favre's football journey really started at Hancock Central North High School in the small town of Kiln, Mississippi. And he played a lot of positions, but quarterback could barely be considered one of them. Favre played lineman, strong safety, place kicker, punter, and quarterback. But he played QB in an option run-oriented offense, in which he only threw around 5 times a game. But when people did see those few times he threw the ball, word started to spread. Coaches around the area kept saying, "You gotta see this Favre kid throw." That's when Southern Miss assistant coach Mark McHale showed up at a Hancock North Central game. At first, it was more of the same, handoff after handoff, and McHale was ready to leave, until Brett finally let one fly. And it wasn't just a throw. McHale said it looked like the ball had smoke and flames coming off it. That single pass was enough to change everything. Southern Miss offered Brett a scholarship, the only Division I offer he got. But there was a problem. Southern Miss still just wanted Favre to play as a defensive back. But Favre wasn't having it. He was a quarterback. And eventually the coaches caved in, and Favre became the 7th-string QB on the team. So you would think he wouldn't play for a long time, right? Well, in Week 3, Southern Miss was getting smacked around by Tulane, and were down 31-14 at halftime. So the coaches gave the freshman a shot. Despite suffering a hangover from the night before and vomiting during warm-ups, Favre trotted out onto the field, cool as ever, and led a comeback for the ages. He threw for over 170 yards and 2 touchdowns in his very first college game. And overnight, he went from QB7 to the starting quarterback. Now, Southern Miss wasn't some top-ranked football factory. They were underdogs most every week. But with Favre under center, they didn't care. He brought chaos, confidence, and cannon fire to a team that needed all 3. And man, did he have some moments. In his junior season, Favre led the Golden Eagles to an upset of number 6 Florida State, capped off with the game-winning touchdown pass with 23 seconds remaining. In his senior season, just 8 weeks after having 30 inches of his intestine removed in emergency surgery from a near-fatal car accident, Favre started against Alabama. But he didn't just start, he beat them in Tuscaloosa. By the time he left Southern Miss, Favre had set school records in passing yards, completions, and touchdowns. And he did it all with no fancy spread offense, no Heisman hype, just pure, raw gunslinger energy. So by the time the 1991 NFL Draft rolled around, Brett Favre was one of the most confusing prospects on the board. On the one hand, he had a cannon for an arm. He beat Alabama while still healing from surgery, and carried Southern Miss to wins they had no business getting. On the other hand, he was raw, wild, and reckless. Scouts loved his arm talent, but hated his mechanics. He'd throw off his back foot, try to squeeze passes into impossible windows, and play like every down was 4th and 20 in the backyard. Some teams were scared off. Then came the Atlanta Falcons, who used the 33rd overall pick on him in the 2nd round. But here's the thing, head coach Jerry Glanville didn't even want him.
Hey, coach, call me Jerry. And he said, "What school are you from, Mississippi?" I was like, "Southern Miss." He said, shit, we drafted the wrong guy.
Glanville would later go on to say it'd take a plane crash for him to play Favre. So, as you can imagine, Favre didn't play much his rookie year. He appeared in 2 games and threw just 4 passes. And honestly, it was a disaster. His very first pass attempt was a pick 6. His very first completion was actually one that he caught himself off a tip. And meanwhile, Favre wasn't helping his case off the field either. Atlanta was a party town, and he treated it like one. There were drinking rumors, maturity questions, and nobody in that building thought this kid was their future. But for some reason, someone else did. In Green Bay, a new GM named Ron Wolf had fallen in love with Favre back when he scouted him at Southern Miss. He believed Favre could be a franchise quarterback. So, in 1992, Wolf traded a first-round pick to get him out of Atlanta. Everyone thought he was crazy. But what they didn't know was that Brett Favre, this reckless, strong-armed backup with a drinking problem, was about to take over one of the most iconic franchises in football history.
I staked my career here on Brett Favre, and he didn't let me down.
But strangely enough, he was traded to be a backup to the Magic Man, Don Majkowski. But then it happened. In Week 2 against Tampa Bay, Majkowski got hurt in the first quarter, so Favre was thrown into the game. And it was ugly. Misfires, confusion, even boos from the home crowd. Then, a week later, the Packers were down 23-17 against the Bengals with just over a minute left. Favre took the ball on his own 8-yard line. No timeouts, no margin for error, and on the final play, he zipped a bullet to Kitrick Taylor for a 35-yard touchdown. Favre threw for 289 yards that day, including a Packers record 22 straight completions. From that moment on, the job was his. And it wasn't clean. It was chaotic, thrilling, and downright dangerous at times. But that's who Brett Favre was. Favre finished the season with over 3,200 passing yards and led the Packers to a 9-7 record, their first winning season in 5 years. However, the birth of a gunslinging legend was just getting started. In 1993, he kept doing all the things that made him impossible to ignore. But he kept doing the other thing he was known for, throwing picks. Favre threw 24 of them, tied for the most in the league. Even with that, he led the Packers to the playoffs for the first time in over a decade. In their wild-card game against the Lions, Green Bay was down 24-21 with just over a minute left. And once again, it was all up to Brett. From midfield, he rolled to his left, flipped his hips, and launched a 40-yard laser across the field to Sterling Sharp. Touchdown. Lambeau went wild. But unfortunately, their run would end the next game in the divisional round to the Cowboys. A year later, it was a nearly identical season. The Packers made the playoffs, beat the Lions in the wild card, but lost to the Cowboys in the divisional round. Still, Favre was quickly becoming a fan favorite, but now he was about to take his game to a whole new level. After years of reckless passes, interceptions, and wild heroics, Favre's mad gunslinger style finally clicked. Brett threw for over 4,100 yards and smashed a then Packers record with 38 touchdown passes. He led the Packers to an 11-5 record and won his first NFL MVP award. And then, just a year later, he was doing it again. He threw for over 3,900 yards and added 39 touchdowns, breaking his own record for most Packers TD passes in a season. He won MVP number 2, and Green Bay finished the regular season 13-3. And in the playoffs, Favre's fearless mentality was on full display. He shredded defenses with his gunslinger throws, making impossible plays look routine. Favre led the Packers past the San Francisco 49ers and the Carolina Panthers before getting matched up with the defending champ Patriots in the Super Bowl. Favre threw for 246 yards and 2 touchdowns, leading the Packers to a 35-21 win for the team's first Super Bowl victory in 29 years. Favre's gunslinger spirit was the heart of the team. And after that Super Bowl win, the Packers entered the 1997 season with a target on their backs. But Favre, he was fearless, as usual. He threw for 3,867 yards and 35 touchdowns, leading the NFL in passing TDs for the 3rd straight season. And with that, Favre became the first player in NFL history to win MVP 3 years in a row. Green Bay finished the regular season 13-3 once again and cruised through the playoffs. They knocked off the Buccaneers, then outlasted the 49ers to return to the Super Bowl for the 2nd year in a row, this time against Elway's Broncos. And it was a battle. Favre played tough, throwing 3 touchdowns and keeping the game tight until the very end. But the Broncos had running back Terrell Davis, who ran wild for 157 yards and 3 scores, leading the Broncos to a 31-24 win. But even in the loss, Favre left it all out there. He competed like a warrior, slung every throw with confidence, and showed once again why he was one of the most thrilling players to ever touch a football. But in '98, things started to get rockier for the gunslinger. Head coach Mike Holmgren, who had helped develop Favre from a raw, wild risk-taker into a 3-time MVP, was preparing to leave the team. The locker room felt unsettled, and Favre himself was battling a painkiller addiction that few knew about at the time.
15 Viking and ES at one time every night.
Still, Green Bay managed an 11-5 record, punching their ticket to the playoffs for the 6th straight season. But in the wildcard round, things unraveled. Favre faced off against a young Steve Young and the San Francisco 49ers. With less than a minute left, the Packers were up by 4 until Young delivered a legendary touchdown pass to Terrell Owens in double coverage, which would become known as the Catch 2. And just like that, Favre's season was over. And the following season, Mike Holmgren was officially out, and the Packers handed the reins to Ray Rhodes, a defensive-minded coach who just didn't mesh with Favre in the same way. In '99, Green Bay finished the season 8-8, and for the first time since 1992, they missed the playoffs. After the season, the Packers fired Rhodes and brought in new head coach Mike Sherman. But the roster was filled with question marks. The run game was inconsistent, and the defense was nothing like the unit that once helped carry them to a Super Bowl. So, Brett put the team on his back again. Favre threw for 3,812 yards and 20 touchdowns. But he also threw 16 interceptions, continuing a trend of high-risk, high-reward football that had defined his entire career. The difference now was that the team wasn't good enough to overcome the mistakes anymore. The Packers finished 9-7, missing the playoffs for the second year in a row. However, help was on the way, because Amon Green was starting to break out as a legitimate dual-threat back, and a young player named Donald Driver was quietly beginning to emerge as a reliable weapon. The Packers finished the 2001 season 12-4, and then dominated the 49ers at Lambeau Field in the wildcard round. But in the divisional round, Favre had one of the worst games of his career. 6 interceptions, including 3 pick sixes, in a brutal 45-17 loss. But by 2002, Brett Favre had the Packers rolling again. Green Bay finished the regular season 12-4, tied for the best record in the NFC, and they were undefeated at Lambeau Field, going 8-0 at home. For the first time since their Super Bowl run, they felt legit again. In the wild card round, the Packers hosted the Atlanta Falcons, led by a second-year quarterback named Michael Vick. Everyone expected Green Bay to roll. Lambeau in January, Favre in the playoffs, this should have been a layup. Instead, Vick torched them, and the Falcons handed the Packers their first ever home playoff loss in franchise history. A 7-27 loss, in which Favre had 2 picks and completed under 50% of his passes. It felt like a gut punch, but if that hurt Favre, then he wasn't ready for next season. Because on December 22nd, just a day after his father, Erwin Favre, suddenly passed away, Brett made the decision to play on Monday Night Football against the Oakland Raiders. He came out like a man possessed, throwing 4 first-half touchdowns and finishing with 399 yards, delivering dime after dime. In what felt like a tribute straight from the heart, it was pure magic. Favre at his most human, and somehow his most superhuman. Green Bay finished the regular season 10-6, making the playoffs again. In the wildcard round, the Packers took down the Seahawks in overtime thanks to Al Harris's pick 6 after Matt Hasselbeck famously said,
"We want the ball, we're going to score."
Then came the divisional round versus the Eagles and the heartbreak. After a hot start, the Packers allowed a 4th and 26 conversion that crushed their momentum. Favre, trying to make something happen in overtime, forced a deep throw and got picked off. Philly kicked the game winner, and just like that, Green Bay's season was over. And all of a sudden, things started going downhill. The Packers missed the playoffs in 2004, and it felt like Favre's career was nearing his end, especially after the Packers drafted a quarterback named Aaron Rodgers in the first round of the 2005 draft, a move that Brett Favre wasn't too happy about.
I think as a starter, my job's hard enough to win ball games and be a leader. You're not a babysitter, and I'm not by no means.
To make matters worse, Favre and the Packers then went 4-12 in 2005, largely due to Favre's 29 interceptions. So, the Packers made some changes, bringing in a new head coach, Mike McCarthy, and a new general manager, Ted Thompson. The Packers finished 8-8, showing signs of progress, but still falling short of the playoffs. So, was the Favre era finally over? Not quite. Because in 2007, Favre was playing with a fire we hadn't seen in years. With Mike McCarthy in his first full year as head coach, the Packers found their groove. Favre threw for 4,155 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions, showing that even in his mid-30s, his arm and his courage were still elite. Green Bay finished the regular season 13-3, the best record in the NFC, and earned a first-round bye in the playoffs. And in the playoffs, the Packers dominated the Seattle Seahawks in the divisional round, winning 42-20, with Favre throwing for 299 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then came the NFC Championship game against the New York Giants, a heartbreaking 23-20 overtime loss that ended Green Bay's Super Bowl dreams. And following that, Brett Favre retired. Or so we thought. Because in 2008, Favre changed his mind. He wanted back in. Green Bay, now fully committed to Rodgers, didn't want to turn back. Tension built. The standoff made the national headlines. And after weeks of awkward press conferences, trade talks, and front office drama, Brett Favre was traded to the New York Jets. The Gunslinger was back, and New York was fired up. And Favre started off strong. The Jets jumped out to an 8-3 record, and Favre looked revitalized. In Week 4, he torched the Cardinals with a career-high 6 touchdown passes, reminding everyone that he could still sling it with the best of them. But then came the collapse. Favre suffered a torn biceps tendon in his throwing arm and tried to play through it. because of course he did, but the results weren't pretty. The Jets lost 4 of their last 5 games and finished 9-7, missing the playoffs. Favre led the league with 22 interceptions, and his play visibly declined down the stretch. So the following season, Favre announced his retirement again, this time for real though, right? Nope. Just months after retiring for the second time, Brett Favre joined the Minnesota Vikings. That's right. Green Bay's most iconic player was now suiting up for one of their most hated rivals. It felt like a betrayal to some, but to Favre, it was unfinished business. At 40 years old, Favre played arguably the most efficient season of his career. He threw for 4,202 yards, 33 touchdowns, and only 7 interceptions, a career low for a full season. With stars like Adrian Peterson, Sidney Rice, and a ferocious defense behind him, the Vikings were loaded. But Favre was the X factor, delivering clutch moments all season, including 2 wins over the Packers. Minnesota finished 12-4, securing a first-round bye in the playoffs. In the divisional round, Favre dismantled the Cowboys with a 4-touchdown performance. Then came the NFC Championship game against the Saints, where Favre took shot after shot, his body bruised and battered. Yet somehow, he kept getting up. Bloodied but unbroken, he fought to keep Minnesota's dream alive. And somehow, he had them on the edge of victory. With the game tied and just seconds left in regulation, the Vikings were in field goal range. All they had to do was protect the ball and let their kicker seal it. But then, in true Favre fashion, with the heart of a warrior and the instincts of a gunslinger, he rolled right, planted his aching leg, and fired across the field. And the pass was intercepted. Just like that, everything unraveled. The Saints won the toss in overtime, drove down the field, and nailed the game-winning kick. And New Orleans went on to win the Super Bowl. But even after that devastating loss, Favre was convinced he had one more season in him. However, his body said otherwise. Minnesota stumbled to a 3-7 start, and the offense that once looked unstoppable suddenly felt stuck in the mud. And the hits kept coming, literally. Favre was sacked and bruised at a historic rate. The offensive line couldn't protect him. His streak of 297 consecutive starts, the longest in NFL history, came to an end in Week 13 after a crushing shoulder injury. The Iron Man was human after all. He returned for one last start in Week 15, but left with a concussion.
Sucks he's hurt, but I mean, it's awesome to get my first sack against him.
And just like that, his career was over, for good this time. But this wouldn't be the last time we saw Brett Favre in the spotlight. Years after he stepped away from the game, he stole headlines for all the wrong reasons.
Oh, you might have heard something about a Mississippi welfare scandal involving Hall of Fame quarterback Brett Favre.
Favre received just over $1 million for the speeches, although it's not clear if he ever gave any speeches.
Favre became a central figure in a massive Mississippi welfare fraud scandal, the largest in the state's history. He was accused of helping direct millions of dollars meant for poor families toward projects he supported, like a volleyball facility at his alma mater, Southern Miss, where his daughter played.
Got to be a sorry mofo to steal from the lowest of the low.
They were taking money out of probably the portion of the world that needs it the most.
So, Favre's post-football reputation has taken serious hits. But in terms of just football, how good was Brett Favre actually? Well, when he retired, he held every major passing record: touchdowns, yards, completions, wins. He started an unbelievable 297 consecutive games as a quarterback. He won 3 straight MVPs. He led the Packers to 2 Super Bowl appearances, winning 1. But numbers don't really capture Brett Favre. Favre was chaos. Glorious, thrilling, heart-stopping chaos. He'd throw a 50-yard laser between 3 defenders on one drive, then toss a heartbreaking interception off his back foot the next. And yeah, he threw more interceptions than anyone in history. But ask any fan, any teammate, any coach, they'd still want him under center with the game on the line. Because Brett Favre was the greatest gunslinger the game has ever seen.